Hello everyone, it is Friday, February 28th, and we're here again for another episode of Retail Now. This week I'm joined by Michael Rogosa, who you have all already met. Once again, my name is Doug Koontz, and new this week on Retail Now we have James DeMarco. James, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm James DeMarco, recent to Retail Net Group of 7 months. Currently I'm a research analyst, and my key retailers, I cover Target and Costco and mainly the US and Canada as a whole.
Great, thanks James. So it's obviously been a big week in the retail world. A lot of key players in the industry, particularly in North America, that have reported results either for the end of a quarter or end of a year. We'll start right now with Target and their recent results. Obviously they've had an interesting last 6 months or so, to say the least.
Exactly.
James, you want to talk about what you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. So Target just released their fourth quarter and year-end results this past week. Target saw a 3.8% sale decrease in their fourth quarter, and they also saw a negative 0.9% decrease in their overall sales. Target also was hit with a major data breach incident that happened in December, right before the holiday season. That greatly affected their sales during the fourth quarter and also affected their the year-end sales. Low overall retail growth across the U.S. And Canadian banners.
Yeah, obviously the U.S., sort of the North American economic climate certainly didn't help Target, but do you get a sense of just how much that data security breach really did hurt them? It was obviously widely publicized, and I presume scared some people away.
Correct. Right before the holiday season, Target had a data breach of over 400 million different credit cards or debit cards, and that really scared away a lot of the customers. Whether it was low income or middle class or higher class, everyone across the board was pretty much kind of drawn away from Target and didn't have as much trust in them going forward. However, going into the new year, 2014, Target has seen a little bit of a revival with their red card users. That's their core group. They've continued to come back in full force, whereas Target's still trying to gain back the trust of their other users who don't really frequent the store as much.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because it was just really unfortunate the timing of those data breaches. I think it was about 10 days before the Christmas season or so that the first one happened. And they did some interesting things to try to get people back into the store, offering the big discounts on their holiday merchandise leading up to Christmas. And then there was a second announcement of the breach impacting. So the first one they released about, it impacted 40 million people or so, and then the second one, the numbers came out that it was actually 70 million people and a wider array of shoppers impacted. So it was just really bad timing for both of those. And I think beyond just some of the negative data breaches, really it was a tough holiday season, I think, for everyone, where we saw, we talked about it last week or a couple weeks ago, it was Walmart's results and really traffic being down across the industry, a couple percent for the quarter and for the holiday season. I think the numbers that we saw for Target, it was closer, they released about 5.5%. They saw a decline in transaction volume. Which we saw, it's basically about double what we were seeing from the other players in the industry. So I think a lot had to do with that data breach, just in that poor timing around the holiday period.
Correct, and you had mentioned this earlier. Target did do a lot of initial cutbacks and promotional deals, and then they had to do another wave of it, which really affected the end tail of their fourth quarter results.
Driving those consumers back into the store.
Right,
certainly.
exactly. So.
Well, it wasn't all bad news and damage control. They've obviously have announced some pretty interesting expansion and sort of new initiatives that they're talking about coming this year. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, big this year and big trend going forward is the small store initiative. So Target, just along other retailers such as Walmart, they're trying to shrink their store size and trying to fit it into places that aren't usually where Target stores are. Now, Target's a big box retailer that can't really fit inside urban areas, so they're going with a smaller format in their Target Express. They're doing a test pilot of this in July 15th in Minnesota near their headquarters to test out the smaller store, see the logistics, how to get shipping in and out,
And do you have any kind of information what kind of size we're actually looking at in this Express store? Because obviously they've had Target City stores for a few years now in some big cities, and while they are smaller than the traditional big Target supercenters, if you will, or mass merchandisers, they're most people still wouldn't consider them small.
Right. I mean, those ones average about 90,000 square feet still, which if you look at, general, to put in perspective, a supercenter tends to be upwards of 150,000 square feet and over. Some of these ones, the city Targets are 90,000. Your traditional supermarkets are more in the range of a 50 or 60,000 square foot building. But these smaller express stores that have really been growing, they tend to be more in the range of like 20,000 square feet. Do we have any sense for is that what Target's opening?
Yeah, Target says that their Target Express stores are going to be 15% the size of their mass merchandise stores. So it's going to be significantly smaller stores, something that Target has never really done before. This is a big step, big movement for Target moving forward. And if they do so, they're going to be able to capture a whole new niche, a whole new consumer group within the urban cities, within tight spaces, something that Target's really never done before. So.
And that's in the U.S., right?
That is in the U.S.
This rollout
correct.
plan, but they're operating in Canada as well. What are they finding there?
So on March 15th, or March 5th, excuse me, they opened their first store in Ontario, Canada, and since then they've launched 124 other stores in Canada. Now, they're continuing to roll out their City Target stores and their Target Express stores in the United States. There's really no plan yet to bring that over to Canada until it's been successfully established in the United States and they understand how it works and really get all the kinks out, close to home, which is in Minnesota. So in Canada, they had a little rough patch, a little bumpy start to the get-go. And that had a lot to do with understanding the Canadian consumer, which is a lot different than the U.S. consumer in many ways. Canada, just like the U.S., is a highly saturated market. And they have a lot of other retailers, such as like a Loblaw or a Walmart, that have come in and they've already kind of established themselves. So Target had to get over a few growing pains in Canada, albeit a decrease in sales than initially expected. They do feel pretty confident moving forward and understand that it is still a learning process. So it's a wait and see for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's obviously other big retailers in the U.S. and across the world that have had big results this year, or in the past week, I guess. Home Depot and Lowe's, two of the biggest home center players in the U.S., have had very positive results, contrary to Target here, in the past couple of days. They both beat their earning projections. Lowe's sales grew by 4.8%, Home Depot by 5.4%, and it certainly stands in contrast to a lot of the severe challenges that they faced during the economic recession. Obviously, these businesses are really tied to the home, kind of the home market and home pricing, and both are reporting really strong results as home prices continue to rise, as people start investing in their home again and trying to drive value up. What we saw over the past 5 or so years during this economic downturn is really people becoming far more conservative, far more utilitarian, really, with their own home investment, and maybe weren't even looking at it as an investment anymore, as people were, as you had this subprime mortgage crisis and a subsequent economic downturn. So both of those are obviously really positive results.
Did they see any adverse conditions from the weather in the winter storms? I know we've seen some stats that said the housing market kind of softened during the winter, but unlike one of the big things that I know we've been following is that unlike some of the timing of the storms that really impacted retail, whether it be the day before Valentine's Day, you got a big storm here on the East Coast. I think we've seen that we expect the housing market to kind of bounce back later in Q1 and early on Q2. Whereas retail may not recover to the same extent some of those sales that it lost during the winter.
Yeah, the home center. First of all, the home center big season obviously starts in the spring,
right?
And the weather has negatively impacted a lot of retail in the Midwest and the South and the Northeast from all these storms. But both Lowe's and Home Depot have actually become pretty resilient just because they've gone through such basically challenging economic times. Home Depot worked really hard to get their cost structure in line with a more difficult economic environment, and Lowe's similarly was pretty conservative in their investment in things like their sales floor labor, and so they quite frankly they are pretty well prepared to already deal with some of these more challenging circumstances. Right. But with that said, it did have a little bit of an impact, but obviously not so significant because we're still looking at 4 or 5% annual growth on the year, and in a channel that's pretty saturated with a lot of competition, that's pretty good.
Have we seen anything from Home Depot and Lowe's in terms of, I know they've done a lot in terms of redesigning the store labor and the technology that's available in the store. Have they done anything? I know, last week we had Mary Sullivan talk about Home Depot's launch of dedicated fulfillment centers for e-commerce for the first time, their first of 3 that they're rolling out. Have we seen similar things from Lowe's and other things from Home Depot as it relates to technology?
Well, that category tends to be, or that channel, tends to be pretty impacted by digital and e-commerce. So pure play players like Amazon can really threaten a lot of the categories that are in the stores of Home Depot and Lowe's.
Right.
And what you see is these players actually investing in technology, like you said, but even more so in-store experience, in-store, I'll call it expertise on the sales floor, because ultimately what they're really banking on is driving trips into the store, because the type of service you can get while there is far superior to something that you might be able to see kind of flipping through online. So it's certainly something that is very top of mind for both of them, and quite honestly they've been very active in investing in things like fulfillment, digital integration, store experience, all these sorts of things, to sort of fend off some of that pressure from some of these outside players. So the home centers, obviously big news this week and positive results. Consumer electronics, the U.S.'s biggest player, had a little bit of a different week. Best Buy, of course, which has faced some struggles in the past. Do you want to talk about what you've been seeing with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Best Buy released their full fourth quarter results on the backs of, they'd already come out with their holiday results back in January. So I don't think it was a surprise to anyone to come back with negative comps down in the U.S. about 1.2% for the fourth quarter, about 0.4% total for the year down. And it was really all driven by a really heavy promotional season across holiday, and some other big challenges that they faced. They were much more impacted by the weather than the home center guys were. And it was actually just a shorter holiday season this year for Best Buy and a lot of the players, or everyone in the market this year, to try to sell into. So they had some really challenges both from online and from store-based players. The biggest things that we heard from them, or the biggest patterns that we heard, was really a heavy promotional holiday season that their main focus this year was they made a commitment to shoppers that they were not going to be beaten on price. And so they played that game, and they drove down their prices, and they actually gained market share throughout the holiday season. It just happened to be that it was so heavily promotional across the consumer electronics space that it still resulted in a declining market. So from Best Buy's perspective, they made a strategic decision to have those heavy promotions and drive down. They did encounter a little bit higher cost than they were expecting, which hit their bottom line as well. And when we talk about things going forward in their Renew Blue program, that is one of the major initiatives that they're going through, is still, how do I continue to drive cost and efficiencies throughout the organization? So that's one of the big things that they're working on. But there were some positives too throughout Q4 from their perspective. They saw online growth of about 25% in Q4 domestically. For the year, it grew about 20%. So that's about almost double what they saw last year. And they were really proactive in terms of encouraging people. If you remember, about 4 months ago or so, or 3 months ago, back in November, there were a bunch of articles about Best Buy's really showrooming position, where they were encouraging shoppers to come into their store, use it as an experience, as a showroom. For them, their just goal is, instead of having people showroom and then eventually shop on Amazon, it's all about how do they keep that sale in their own building. whether it be
digital obviously plays a huge role in their category, and they experienced pretty good results for their own banner, but obviously there's still these outside pressures. You talk about store experience. What really are they trying to do to basically keep people off their smartphones while they're in the store?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that Best Buy is trialing is a really heavy investment in store within a store programs. And the two biggest ones are their Samsung stores and the Windows stores that really launched this year. They've had the Apple ones for a little while. They had their Geek Squad services. And they've done some interesting things throughout the last year and a half or so to really turn their stores into much more of engagement and experience zones rather than walking up and down the aisles of a consumer electronics, traditional store that you might have seen 10 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And so these store within a store programs, they've really been beneficial in differentiating what you can find online. So they've really tried to both use brands to drive people into the store, and then also to the same way that the home center folks are reallocating labor, Best Buy is making a big investment in in-store customer experience to try to continue to differentiate itself from online, whether that be just knowledgeable people and knowledgeable associates, all the way through to their services like Geek Squad that really keep people coming back in.
Yeah, I mean, with these efforts, they're still really not immune to this sort of pressure. What's really going on with the store base, and long term, where do we kind of see that, given they'll invest heavily in some of these experience things that you talk about, but their key competitors aren't going to go away, and frankly, they're growing really quickly.
Yeah, they're going to continue to go through a store rationalization process, both in the U.S. and domestically, as they continue to face these pressures from online retailers and from some other store-based competitors. But their whole initiative is how do I get my store base both from a size perspective, because they continue to drive down the overall size of their stores as they realize that some categories are just completely moving online and have over the last really 3 or 4 years, when you think about media and some of these other categories. So for them, it's all about understanding what is the right amount of space that I need to have in my store, what are the right categories, how do I make it a very differentiated experience, either through my associates or through different departmentalization approaches. But we would still expect to see, some store closures and rationalization happening just because of the pressure that they're facing from online.
Yeah. Changing gears here a little quick, we covered some of the biggest sort of investor highlights that we've seen this week. Another big news piece that we saw came out very recently, we've been waiting, there's been a lot of energy around it, is this new FDA regulation around food product labeling for packaged goods. Essentially what happened is some people gotten together and are pushing hard to relabel the nutritional content that they're listing on packages, redefining what a serving size really is, and putting some special attention on some particular ingredients that maybe could have some health consequences. So things like sodium, things like sugar will be called out in this proposed new legislation that is currently up for debate. It was sort of submitted this week, and so now it has 90 days to go through a public vetting process, if you will, at which point the legislators going to have to decide, is this something we're going to pursue? Obviously, there's been a lot of attention around this type of issue. We've seen it with healthy lunches in schools. We've seen it with the sugary soda tax ban in New York City, or the big drinks ban. So it's obviously something that's top of mind.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot, and this is part of just a general overall trend that we're seeing across the retail space here, not only in the U.S., but really across the retail world. This focus on improving the health and quality of the products that people are using. You talk about the initiatives in schools. I think it's been the First Lady's major initiative to try to get some of those products, at least in the hands of children, to stop marketing to them, not stopping them from being sold, but stop marketing as heavily to younger students. And again, it's not something that you see only here in the U.S. You see higher taxes on these types of things across Latin America as well. But I think that this is just a continuing trend of what we're seeing from a health and wellness portfolio, and a string of health and wellness, I think, regulations that we're going to see that, really have the end consumers in mind.
Right. Just also to touch on that, I know the Target, they just come out with all their information on their Target Fresh stores, and they're really trying to revamp their U.S. stores. All their large mass merchandise stores, they're really trying to revamp it into this fresh idea where you can walk in and you don't just get the merchandise and the produce. You get that specific area of the store that's completely healthy. That's everything's organically grown and really just has that healthy feel to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen these kind of niche healthy grocers out there for a long time. People like the Fresh Market, even Whole Foods, if you want to call them that. But there's certainly sort of more mainstream retailers that are really investing in this sort of thing. So Target's a great example. But I mean, CVS and Walgreens have invested incredibly heavily in this sort of thing. People really clearly banking on this being a big issue going forward in the future. So one other big piece of news that actually just recently was kind of revealed is this idea that Sam's Club in the U.S. is going to test their own online subscription service for products. So you might be familiar with the Amazon program, Subscribe and Save, where someone with a Prime membership can actually sign up to receive a particular product at a specific interval or frequency. So it's big with some of the consumer packaged goods, health and beauty products, diapers, razors, a lot of those sorts of products. And with that, if you sign up for this sort of program, you actually get up to a 15% discount as they send it to you. And they'll just send it to you every month or every 3 months, whatever you specify. Sam's Club has done something fairly similar. They call it My Subscriptions. And they too are going to try this with about 700 different products across a few different categories, some of the same ones I just mentioned. The difference between them and Amazon is obviously Sam's Club members already pay a membership, so there's not an additional fee, so that's already included. But there's also not any sort of savings incentive in the same way that Amazon Subscribe and Save provides with this 15% discount. So that's certainly interesting news.
Is it going to be a delivery service, Doug?
It's going to be. It's very much still in early trial stages. Truly announced in the past few hours, and it's going to be a delivery service, and it's interesting because of sort of the competitive dynamics between what Amazon does and someone like Sam's Club. So you could argue that there's a lot of overlap between that shopper base. I should have mentioned Amazon already, when they send these items, it's not a single package of diapers. It's a big supply of something in a larger pack quantity to make the economics of delivery work. And obviously that's how they provide some of this discount. But so that's really well aligned already with what Sam's does, these large quantities of particular focused SKUs. And it's certainly something to watch as everyone tries to hash out where this idea of sort of online fulfillment and convenience really fits and what role all these different channels play in it. Sam's Club, Walmart in general has been very active in a lot of their digital capabilities, digital fulfillment. They've been some of the first to market in a lot of these different technologies and services and offerings. So I guess it should be no surprise that Sam's Club is someone to be a part of this type of program, but it certainly presents a lot of interesting questions going forward.
Yeah, it really has, when you think about Amazon Subscribe and Save, it really does piggyback on a lot of what you might think of as a traditional club membership. It's a flat fee, then you get all the benefits of being a member basically of this service. So it doesn't really surprise us so much that now the clubs are kind of going and just trying to combat Amazon's convenience that continues to target sort of that same shopper, especially as Amazon gets ready to launch Amazon Pantry this year, which I'm sure you'll hear more about this topic from Keith and Mary when they go through their Amazon update. But I don't think we've sort of expected this type of move from one of the club guys for a little bit now, just because it makes so much sense from where the shopper is going in terms of the increasing need for convenience and delivery options.
Yeah.
My question, and I don't know if we know this information yet, is, so we know it's a delivery service. Is it a free delivery service as well? So there's no additional charge at all for the shopper?
There's not a ton of details out there.
Okay.
My perception is that you'd have to have that be the case. Otherwise, sort of the incentive between that and Amazon Prime is pretty clear, right? I mean, a lot of the club members are already offering free delivery on certain pricing parameters over a certain threshold. And if you're buying something at a 3-month clip, you'll probably end up fulfilling that anyways.
Yep.
But it'll certainly be interesting to see how they position it and really incentivize people to try to pick that over Amazon Prime. So
yeah, it'll definitely be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah. Well, Mike, obviously folks that have met us before know that we're actually both part of our client services team here.
Yep.
And as clients work with us, they're obviously constantly submitting questions, things they're working on, things that are top of mind for them. What have we seen recently from that's really generating a lot of momentum and interest among the people that we work with?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the major questions we got from clients this week were around the major releases. So we had a lot of questions about Target and whether they were going to come out and give more specifics around how much of an impact the data breach had, and specifically around just some of the other players that were releasing results this week. Just as always, our clients are pretty interested in just what's happening in the landscape. From a more societal point of view, the interest in the millennial shopper and the difference in how they engage with retail versus a boomer still continues to be one of the driving questions that we get almost on a weekly basis, that we've done a lot of work around to understand the differences of both values and shopping patterns that millennials have versus boomers. And so anyone, watching, if that's of interest to you, you can always reach out to Doug or I or anyone on the team to find more information. But, really those have been two of the biggest ones, along with the other pervasive one is always around what people are doing from an online or digital platform to really continue to drive, either store experience or drive their e-commerce business. Specifically, we've had a lot of questions around grocery players over the past week and what they're doing in an online space.
Great, thank you for that. Well, yeah, like Mike said, if you do have an interest in some of those topics, by all means, please reach out to us. And if you're particularly interested in the digital focus, as you may know, Keith every week does an Amazon and Focus segment similar to this one, so be sure to check that one out. But that's it for us from Retail Now. Thanks again for joining us, and stay tuned for next week's session. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.